Hello, my name is Christian Fajardo, and I work in the Office of Personnel Management with the Executive Resources and Performance Management Policy team. We provide government-wide human capital policy for the Senior Executive Service and Performance Management and awards for all federal employees. Today, our focus will be on performance management for federal employees. So you may have asked yourself, why is it important to measure performance? Consistently hitting the mark without performance management is almost impossible. Good performance management focuses everyone on organizational goals and their individual contributions to achieving them. Each individual employee needs to know and be held accountable for their expected results and to ensure achievement of the organization's goals. Performance management is the systematic process by which an agency involves its employees in improving organizational effectiveness and the accomplishment of agency mission and goals. Within the requirements of the law and regulations, each agency decides the specific policies and practices it will use to accomplish this objective. Now, let's talk about the 5 processes in the performance management cycle. First, you have planning performance, which will be our primary focus today. This is when elements and standards are established and goals and expectations are set for individuals and groups. Even though this is the first process of the performance management cycle, it will affect and be affected by other ongoing processes we will describe next. The planning process may be revisited throughout the performance management cycle and needs to allow for capturing changes to goals and expectations as priorities or resources change. Later on, I'll go into more detail on the planning process and establishing elements and standards. The second process is monitoring performance, which should happen throughout the appraisal period. This is when the supervisor provides feedback to employees on progress toward elements and standards and other communicated goals and priorities. The supervisor should reinforce positive performance toward achieving accomplishments and get employees back on track by identifying and addressing less than acceptable performance. The third process in the performance management cycle is developing performance. Like monitoring, this should happen throughout the appraisal period. Supervisors can help employees increase their capacity to perform by identifying and building skills needed to meet the agency mission. Also, together with employees, supervisors should review the workplace environment, including the policies, practices, and tools used so they can identify and help remove obstacles in the way of optimal performance. The fourth process is rating performance, which occurs annually at the end of the appraisal period. This is when the supervisor evaluates employee performance against the elements and standards in the employee's performance plan and prepares and communicates a rating of record for each employee. The ability to do this effectively depends directly on the clarity with which elements and standards are established and communicated during the planning phase. Last but not least, the fifth process is rewarding performance. This is when the supervisor recognizes and rewards the employee for their performance and contributions to the agency mission. There are different forms of awards, such as cash awards, which include both rating and non-rating based awards, and non-monetary awards. Some rely on the rating of record as the basis for the recognition, and others are most effective when provided as near as possible to the accomplishment being recognized. Remember, performance management is an ongoing process and is most effective when all of these 5 processes are integrated with open and clear communication. Let's get started on the focus of this presentation, which is the planning process. Planning is when performance expectations and goals are set for groups and individuals to channel their efforts toward achieving organizational objectives. It also includes the establishment of measures that will be used to determine whether expectations and goals are met and to identify and describe different levels of performance. Involving employees in the planning process helps them understand the goals of the organization, their role in achieving those goals, what needs to be done, and how well it should be done to be successful. Of course, where a union has been granted exclusive recognition, involvement of bargaining unit employees must include their elected union representatives to the extent permitted by law. Let's talk about how to determine the appropriate results to include in performance elements. First, you must identify the agency's strategic goals and the priorities in the current organizational performance plan. Then, you determine the work unit results that support those goals and priorities, which at the employee level is usually in the form of products or services. Once you determine these results, you'll be ready to identify individual critical elements. Let's look at the 3 methods available to determine work unit results. The first method that can be used in determining work unit results is the goal cascading method. Essentially, with this method, you are cascading the agency goals and priorities down to the work unit level. In using this method, you want to look at the agency goals and objectives and choose the ones that relate to the work unit. Next, you determine what products or services the work unit produces or needs to produce to help meet the identified agency goals and priorities. This is really the key part of the process, since this will become the basis for individual critical elements. Support functions like IT, HR, and procurement may not lend themselves well to this goal cascading method. Instead, these work units often lend themselves better to using the customer focus method. In most cases, these groups are critical to achieving one or more of the agency's priorities, which often are communicated outside the strategic planning process. The second method that can be used to determine work unit results is the customer focus method, which is when you determine what the work unit provides to its customers to meet their needs. Again, this method often works best for support positions such as IT and HR. Many strategic plans do not include specific goals for these support positions, since these positions tend to indirectly support all of the agency's strategic goals. In using this method, it is important to identify both internal and external customers and what products or services they expect. Think about results, not activities, as you use this approach. You're essentially developing a list of products or services and identifying the customers who receive them. The third approach that can be used to determine work unit results is the workflow charting method. This method works well for work units that are responsible for a complete work process, such as casework processing, report writing, or producing and delivering customer information. This method, you develop workflow charts. A workflow chart is a depiction of the major steps in a work process or project. As you can see in the slide, we use building a house to illustrate this process. First, pour the foundation. Then, you put up the walls and the chimney. Next, you build the roof. And finally, the doors and windows. These are all distinct steps within the workflow charting method. Once you've identified the organization's goals and priorities, as well as the work unit results, you will need to decide which of these and how to include them in individual critical elements. All employees must have at least one critical element in their performance plan, and most have more than one. However, it is important not to place too many elements into the employee performance plans, as this can disperse their attention and distract them from focusing on the achievements that are critical to mission accomplishment. Critical elements must address individual performance only, except in the case of supervisors who may be held responsible for a work unit's products and services. Remember that critical elements are work assignments or responsibilities of such importance that unacceptable performance on the element would result in a determination that an employee's overall performance is unacceptable. It is crucial that supervisors and employees work together to determine the appropriate elements and standards to include in the employee's performance plan. The performance plan lays out the roadmap for the employee to help guide him or her towards success. The elements and standards are the building blocks for effective performance-focused communication throughout the appraisal period. Together, you must develop the results-focused critical elements and fully successful performance standards so you can foster a shared understanding of what the employee is expected to accomplish and how that aligns with and supports the success of the agency mission. Now, I'd like to move on to developing performance standards. Performance standards are management-approved expressions of the performance thresholds, requirements, or expectations that employees must meet to be appraised at particular levels of performance. Well-developed performance standards provide the means to differentiate among and between performance levels. Each critical element must have a performance standard established at the fully successful level. Organizations may find it helpful to provide performance standards that describe other performance levels as well. Performance standards should include measures of quality and quantity, timeliness, and/or cost-effectiveness as appropriate. Of these, quality measures usually are the most important since they describe how the employee and rater will know that the result has been achieved. The stakeholder or the customer will most definitely care how well the work is done. Other measures should be included when they impact the achievement of the result. It is very rare that a single measure in isolation is sufficient to determine or describe successful completion of a performance expectation. It's helpful to take advantage of measures that are already in place or available when they provide the assessment information needed. When numerical metrics are inappropriate or ineffective, and the result can only be by observation, then clarify who will actually be appraising or assessing the work and what factors will be considered. Simply put, what is the rater looking at? The result. And what is he or she looking for? A description of successful completion. Regulations require agencies to write performance standards at the fully successful level. However, if your performance appraisal program uses additional element rating levels above fully successful, employees want to know what they need to do to attain those ratings. One of the most important things supervisors and employees can do when planning performance for the appraisal cycle is to discuss what would constitute these higher levels of performance and how they can be reached. Of course, the outcomes of these discussions will depend directly on the type of work that needs to be accomplished and the measures chosen to assess that work. In considering what outstanding or exceptional performance would look like, it's important to remember there are two main types of standards: comparative standards that make up most performance plans, and additive standards that are used less often. Comparative standards measure performance on a continuum that describes what is good, fully successful, better, exceeds fully successful, or best, outstanding. These standards are generally associated with numeric measures where it is possible to express ranges of performance and set the floor for outstanding, such that all performance above this floor falls into the outstanding category. Additive standards measures performance by describing the results to be completed or the benchmarks used to assess a single result at each level of performance. Achieving a particular result could be all that is needed to meet the fully successful level, and then completing other additional results, often those that add something extra or are nice to have products or services, would meet higher performance levels. Another way these are constructed is by addressing the benchmarks used to assess the products and services, whereby the basic indicators for an acceptable output are described at the fully successful level, and additional indicators that would contribute to better products or services that surpass expectations are described for higher performance levels. When applying additive standards, the results for each successful level is dependent on having achieved those of the previous level. For example, as shown on the slide, a fully successful rating is based on results met. An exceeds fully successful rating is based on fully successful results met plus other specified results met. And an outstanding rating is based on fully successful plus exceeds fully successful results met plus other specified results met. Now, here are some examples of how to describe measures of quality, quantity, timeliness, and cost effectiveness. Quality can be measured by stating permissible error rates or describing who will make the assessment that the output is ready to be provided, or including the benchmarks that will be used to assess it, such as in accordance with appropriate guidelines. Quantity can be measured with a number or percentage that should be tracked. It is important to capture acceptable quantity amounts in ranges so the measure clearly indicates what falls within the specified level of performance. Using single numbers would cause anything other than meeting that number precisely to fall into the next higher or lower performance level. Single quality indicators may be acceptable when describing the floor of the highest performance level. Timeliness can be measured by specifying deadlines or timeframes for completion of a product or service. In some cases, it may be necessary to include externally imposed timeliness measures. In others, such as the use of production rates, they may be set based on projections of what is expected that are informed by historical data and current or anticipated working conditions, such as staff levels or technology changes. Cost effectiveness often is applied most appropriately at work unit levels or higher. It generally would include measures such as cost per unit, rework needed, or return on investment. Usually, the ability to hold a single employee accountable for the cost effectiveness of a product or service is limited. However, if an organization determines it is an appropriate and effective metric, it should be included in the employee's performance standard. Now, I would like to cover a few reminders as you are developing performance plans, particularly focused on the establishment of performance standards. The Merit System Protection Board has held that retention standards must be attainable, allow for some error, and inform the employee of the level of performance needed to retain his or her job. The retention standard always describes the performance that is one level above the unacceptable level, which is usually the minimally successful level and sometimes the fully successful level. Your agency performance appraisal program will determine which one. With that said, there are two types of retention standards to avoid: absolute retention standards and backward standards. First, let's talk about avoiding absolute retention standards. An absolute retention standard is one that allows for no errors. The only time it is acceptable is when a single failure to perform would result in loss of life, injury, breach of national security, or great monetary loss. These are the only instances in which an agency can require perfection from its employees at this level. Some questions to ask to determine whether or not the standard has been written as absolute are: how many times can an employee fail and still meet the standard? How many times can an employee not do something and still meet the standard? Does the retention standard contain key problematic words like all, each, never? These are possible indicators of an absolute standard. Also, you must avoid backward standards. Performance standards should be described in terms of positive or successful performance, not negative performance. You want to describe what is expected for success, not how to avoid failure, which tends to be expressed in negative terms. When your program includes a minimally successful level, level 2, it is easy for supervisors to describe performance in terms of what is not getting done versus what must be done. In order to determine if the standard is written backward, you should ask, could the employee do nothing and still meet the standard? For example, if the standard says an employee completes less than 4 projects a year, that means the employee can complete no projects at all and still meet the standard. So that is a backward standard. Another question to ask is, does the standard describe negative performance? For example, a standard that says the employee requires assistance more than 50% of the time. If an employee requires assistance 90% of the time or all of the time, the employee still would meet the standard. Once you have completed the whole process, identified strategic goals and priorities, determined work unit results, developed individual performance elements and standards, you will need to check the performance plans for completeness and applicability. Make sure the critical elements are truly critical, since failure in a critical element means the employee will have a summary rating of record of unacceptable. Ensure the range of acceptable performance is clear and that the employee knows what is expected of him or her. These expectations should be attainable, reasonable, and within the employee's control. Also, when checking the performance plan, ensure that the standards are appropriate to appraise the performance element. You want the fully successful level to be written at a level that is challenging, yet reasonable. And it has to be surpassable in order to rate employees at higher levels. Well-developed performance standards provide the basis for differentiating performance. Keep in mind, employees need to know what to do and how well they need to do it. This information should be reflected in the employee's performance plan and clearly communicated and understood. Finally, I would like to leave you with OPM's performance management website information, which has lots of tools and resources, reference materials, and frequently asked questions. On the OPM website is a tool we hope you will find particularly useful, the OPM Handbook on Measuring Employee Performance. Our presentation today has been a shortened version of the information you will find in that handbook. Also, here is our office email address if you'd like to contact us with questions about this presentation or other performance management related issues. Thank you so much for your time, and I hope you have found this information helpful.